Good morning, and thanks everyone for joining us today, at least morning in my time zone, which is Eastern. I think maybe earlier morning for our guest today. Today, we're really happy to have Christian Smith with us. Christian is the Chief Revenue Officer for Splunk, a company that many of you will know. But they're a software platform. I'd say keywords are digital resilience, and we'll hear more about that shortly. But they provide customers a unified security and observability platform and have done that quite well for a long time. So some more to learn there. Christian, thanks for joining us today.
Well, it's my pleasure. Nice to be with you.
Terrific. So first, I think we have to start with the big news, and that is that last week you announced an acquisition of Splunk by Cisco. So first of all, congratulations. I know that's a big day, but just two questions to start on this. The first being, so I know it's a big deal in terms of the organization and sort of being able to grow with the backing of Cisco, I would imagine. But how does this bring more value to your customers?
Yeah, really good question. And the first question that I asked, frankly, because it's a big day, it's big news for everybody at Splunk and certainly everybody at Cisco. But what's really interesting is that what we think of at Splunk every day is what's in it for a customer. What's the customer going to see in terms of value out of everything we do? And certainly this combination of capabilities is extremely good for customers. Partly because there's a synergy of the mission of the two companies and the focus of the companies to build a resilient world, but there's very little overlap in our products. So what this really means is a customer now has multiple options in end-to-end security and end-to-end digital resilience with capabilities that have never been seen before in the market. So we think customers will benefit from complementary roadmaps, certainly the scale of Cisco in terms of its global reach and support, even outpacing and augmenting Splunk's. And I think the complementary cultures of that focus on customer.
Yeah, because you're both great places to work. So I imagine you also have complementary cultures in terms of your employees as well.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we have a lot of ex-Cisco people in my organization. And hearing from them after the news was just so rewarding because every single one of them said, it's their second favorite place that they ever worked with Splunk. And, I think it just shows, to have a company that big and to have such a positive brand amongst its employees is really pretty stellar.
Yeah, terrific. All right. So the second question around the acquisition is opportunities, right? I mean, it's wonderful to have all these things that are complementary, but what opportunities do you see as a result of this?
Well, I think first and foremost, for our customers and partners, Cisco's global reach and scale is going to immediately benefit them in terms of serviceability, localization, and even the scale of the partner network that Cisco has. It's really astounding. So I think that's an early opportunity. The second one is we do a lot of work with Cisco already today, bringing Cisco data into Splunk systems, both for security use cases and IT ops resilience use cases. And I think there's an immediate opportunity to make that even more integrated, more out of the box so that customers get to outcomes faster. And then as we look at the rest of the Cisco portfolio, we think that there's an opportunity to do even more work there where we're not doing it today on integration and complementary workflows across both sets of products that will help the customers and frankly, get them to value a lot faster.
Oh, terrific. So I know that's been sort of core to Splunk's purpose these past 2 decades, and Splunk is now celebrating its 20th anniversary. So that in and of itself is something wonderful to celebrate. But can you talk a little bit about the company itself, sort of its proposition and how it's evolved over these 2 decades?
Yeah, what's interesting about Splunk is that it started with a very simple concept, and that was the founders, whenever they're trying to get to root cause of what caused a problem in an application or a system, the way you had to do that was to pour through log files. And that takes days, weeks, sometimes months to figure out what actually happened. And they thought there's got to be a better way. And they did come up with Splunk as a better way, a proprietary search capability across a proprietary time-based database that ingests any kind of data and allows you to ask questions of that data regardless of its structure. So I always think of it as you're trying to find Elm Street in the middle of New York City. You can either wander around Elm Street for days or weeks,
Yeah.
wandering around the city trying to find it, or you can create an index, which would be like a phone book or a map. And that's
Hmm.
what Splunk does. It creates that index of all your information so you can figure out the problems quickly. Well, that served the company extremely well. But what happened through time is we figured out that that capability is really at the heart of digital resilience.
Hmm.
And finding problems is really important. But if you can also prevent problems, you can monitor and predict and automate response to problems, you could actually get through issues much faster and more resiliently. Because resilience basically is how do you absorb shock? Because
Yeah.
shocks will happen. And as systems have become more critical today than they were 20 years ago, digital systems, applications,
Hmm.
we all know this. They run our world. Keeping those applications and systems up, performant, reliant, secure, and compliant is now critical to almost every organization. So the power and purpose of Splunk has become even more relevant to customers in almost every industry across the globe.
Mm. Wow. So you seem to be doing really well at that, right? I've just looked at your financial results for the second quarter and just tremendous growth. I'll just roll off some numbers here that I'm sure you're familiar with. So total ARR was 3.858 billion, up 16% year over year, which by the way, right, when you are at $3.8 billion, 16% year over year is a tremendous number. Total revenues of almost $1 billion, 911 million. Cloud revenue grew almost 30% to 445 million. Just amazing, amazing numbers, particularly for a company that is that large and has been around that long. How do you lead as the chief revenue officer? How are you leading your team through this?
It's a really good question, and it's a complicated answer because those numbers didn't come easily, as you can imagine. Splunk was, when I got here almost 7 years ago, almost entirely sold on premise with perpetual licensing. And so the
Right.
transformation we've had to make is to transform that business to primarily cloud first, not cloud
Mm-hmm.
only, but cloud first. So the bulk of our business is now in the cloud 6.5 years later. And all of our licensing and revenue is on a recurring revenue basis. So we had to not just scale and grow the business, but we had to radically transform all of our operating metrics, how we sold to customers, the value proposition, and sort of ramp and loop those metrics. Because anybody who's followed big migrations of financial models like the Adobes and Autodesks,
Right.
there's a lot of complication in the financial model as you make that transformation or kind of go through the J curve. But what we sort of did is try to keep things pretty simple. First and foremost, start with putting the customer at the center of everything that we do, which is actually ironically harder than it sounds. Because I think in business, we tend to put ourselves in the center of everything. We kind of put, our message and our product and, our goals. And I think we can all learn from organizations that put customers at the center. And we made that very purposeful shift. If we're going to make this transformation and continue to grow, if there isn't value in the customers, we're never going to be able to do it. If all we're thinking about is what's in it for us. So that's kind of number one. I think the second thing was in this journey, being super close with the product and finance organizations on what the goals are. How are we going to get there together? And because it's a combination of product capability, innovation, and how that serves the customer. And then with finance, it's how are we going to make those financial steps and what matters the most and how do we juggle those different kind of goalposts on the journey? Because you're thinking about growth, profit, efficiency, gross margin. Those are all things that are important to understand in that journey. I think the other thing is we have to really set with our field teams a clear vision and a clear purpose for what we're doing. My personal belief is when you connect your GTM teams to purpose, which in my view is what we do, how does that impact the customer? And more importantly, the customer's life, the customer as an
Mm-hmm.
individual. And if we can connect with what we're doing to that level, we put a lot of why and how into the work so that the outcomes have meaning and people can connect to the work and understand why they're doing what they're doing and what the impact of that is not just on our business, not just on our financials, but literally on the lives of the people that we serve every day. And you don't always get to connect those dots very cleanly, but in the work that we do at Splunk, as I kind of alluded to, it actually is very impactful to the lives of the customers that we serve in terms of the quality of life, their ability to spend time with their families, their ability to keep the world safer. And then I think the last thing is making sure that we're investing in the village that supports the GTM organization in that growth, and recognizing that we have to kind of give up our egos a bit. When we sell things that are super high value and complicated and robust, like what we do at Splunk, it's done through a village of resources that are all circling around the customer to help the customer get to the value that we're promising. That includes, our support organization, services organization, product organization. It certainly includes our expert teams and our partners. So what we try to do is really make sure that everybody at Splunk understands that that village is what leads to everybody being successful, and to have the mindset that allows them to work successfully in that type of teaming environment.
Yeah. I'm just recalling a conversation I had with Atlassian CRO, very much the same successful organization, but completely focused on the customer. What I find really interesting about that is we all act in our best self-interest, or at least our perceived best self-interest. And what you're talking about is getting really core alignment about the perceived best self-interest of the sellers and the organization, and the perceived best self-interest of the customers. And I think that's when magic happens from a revenue growth perspective.
Yeah, it's very different than the selling world that I was trained in when I first started my career. So it's come a long way, I think. And when you're in a SaaS world, I would say that you have to organize that way. You have to focus that way, because the customer will vote with their wallet. Ultimately, you're delivering a service, not a product. And we all know, in the world of service, everything that you do matters in terms of the customer's experience. So I think that ties nicely. And I think that evolution has been very good for sort of modern customers and what they expect and what they should expect out of selling organizations.
Yeah, it's great. So maybe you could talk a little bit about sort of the evolving role of sellers in this marketplace, and the strategies that can be used to transition teams from being transactional to using use case or customer-centric selling models.
I think I could write a small book about this topic.
Maybe you will. Yeah.
Maybe I will. You could ghostwrite it for me, by the way. We're on this journey, and have been. When I came to Splunk, I would say that we were very good at selling software and gigabytes of data, which is sort of the metric we used, and very good at going and corralling what the demand was for that. And purposefully, I've taken us on a journey to change that mindset. And we had to, because in that transformation that I spoke about, we went from selling gigabytes of software to changing customers from buying perp to term licensing, and then to cloud licensing, all kind of transformations we had to do. But it's super important that we get back to and focus on the use case, because at the end of the day, every customer I meet with, every C-level executive I talk to will say the exact same thing. Tell me what the value is I'm getting out of paying this money to you. And I think what we forget sometimes as sellers is that everything is about value. It starts there, right? A customer has a problem. They believe that we can solve it. We help them see that they can solve it with us. They deploy our solution and hopefully start solving that problem. But often in selling, we think of everything as a handoff. My job is to articulate that we can solve the problem, convince you I can solve the problem, get you to sign a contract, and then I toss it over the wall and somebody else does everything else. And then I show up a year later and I say, do you want to buy more? And that approach just won't work anymore, because the customer is demanding value. And the demand for value doesn't sit just with the economic buyer anymore. Particularly when you have macroeconomic times like this, the spotlight shines brightly on the fact that your champions will change, your economic buyers will change, and the value of your solution has to be able to be articulated all the way up to the CFO level. Because if you can't do that, you're going to get voted off the island, right? And that requires a shift in mindset. It really does. I mean, a seller has to think of themselves on a continuous journey now of solving problems and getting to value realization, articulating that value realization, codifying it so it's defendable. And then you're in a position as a partner to earn more, earn that next use case. And I think that that's a combination of certainly there's a process journey change there. But more importantly, I think it's an absolute mindset shift for sellers. I don't think all sellers can actually make it on that journey, to be blunt. I think there are some who just don't want to, they just don't want to be in the value realization business. And I think they'll find a place to survive, in the ecosystem. But in organizations like ours, where we know we have to shift to use cases, outcomes, and value, we have to have a set of sellers who are willing to be part of that ongoing process with the customer and be closer to the customer.
Yeah. Well, that also goes back to your village analogy, right? That it takes a village, it's not about making the deal, it's about making the deal work, which is a phrase I used to talk about M&A, right? A lot of people get paid to make the deal, but not so many to make the deal work. It's the same thing when you're selling value to an organization. Just getting it over the finish line for the quarter does not create value for the client or the customer. It takes the rest of your village to do that. It's terrific. So you've used the term, and certainly Splunk uses the term a lot, digital resilience. Can you talk a little bit more about what that means and some guidance for enterprise organizations in terms of getting through this journey of digital resilience?
And it is a journey. That is true. I think our customers resonate with our messaging because resilience is now a board level initiative at organizations. And it's because of the criticality of all the digital systems now to revenue, to compliance, and to their employee experience as well as customer experience. And the journey, we think, is kind of 4 steps. The first is you can't be resilient unless you have visibility. And visibility means you have to have the ability to see all of your critical assets, your applications, your devices, your services. And that actually is harder than you imagine. It takes, work with organizations like Splunk to ingest the data across those systems so that you can quickly see them and find them. And that visibility is a journey in itself. It typically starts with what are the most critical applications and services and devices, because it takes a lot of effort, it takes money. And so prioritizing that's super important to get the baseline visibility that you need. The next thing is you have to get good at prioritizing, and specifically prioritizing the actions you're going to take across that visibility. So you start to work on monitoring and seeing real time what's happening across your estate, and then prioritizing what things you're going to take action on. And then the next step of the 4 steps is really how you get proactive in your response. So not just monitoring and not just prioritizing how you're going to respond to things that go bump in the night, but how do you get proactive and start working on problems before they become problems? And that's really where you're applying machine learning and artificial intelligence more effectively across all that data to do pattern matching, to actually predict issues before they happen and take actions before they happen. When you do all 3 of those things well, particularly across your critical applications and services, the things that really cannot go down, with all that insight, you're actually able to deliver optimized and differentiated end user experiences, because you're no longer just firefighting. You actually see how your apps and services are running, you see how healthy they are, and you can start to differentiate the experience you give to your customers because you're able to do that and see more data around those experiences and make changes based on the data patterns so that customers have better experiences with the applications and services of your organization. So those are kind of the 4 stages of it. There's a lot more underneath that, of course, but I think every customer we work with realizes that it is a journey. and they can't get all the way to the end on everything that they do. So it's kind of working with the customers to figure out how we're going to get there with them. How do you prioritize, and how do you make, really big, bold improvements every year in those digital experiences?
Great. Well, you mentioned AI, which of course is the buzzword for 2023. I imagine Splunk, like many other successful companies, has been using AI in some form for a long time, just that it's now the word. So you mentioned AI and machine learning. Can you say a little more about how Splunk uses those technologies?
Yeah, absolutely. We've embedded AI in our products for, gosh, probably 10 years now.
Mm.
And they certainly get better every year. And we do them probably differently than a lot of organizations, but maybe similar to organizations that have a lot of really intense and unique data. So
Mhm.
AI is only as good as the data. We all know that. And at Splunk, obviously, we're ingesting massive amounts of data. And we use the AI to help prioritize insights, to
Mhm.
correlate and see patterns and trends, and to cut through the noise, because the signaling can be massive. I have a customer that has 20 million attacks a day on their website, and the only way you can actually pattern match and cut through those events and figure out what things should their analysts pay attention to is with artificial intelligence. That's the only way to do
Mhm.
it. So purpose built around the use cases is absolutely what we focus on, with humans at the center of everything, because at the end of the day, what you have to do is help the human being make a better decision by
Mhm.
giving them better pattern matching, help them see patterns, correlations, and risk thresholding. We do so, though, see an emerging area that we announced at our user conference, where we now can start to see the ability to bring AI assistance into the user experience. So
Mhm.
we announced that. And I think that's a byproduct of the evolution of large language models, where purpose-built AI and ML, which we have, we just get better and better at it. The large language models, which are sort of the big hoorah today, they have a place, but that place is more around, how do you bring content and context into that same cockpit that just helps an analyst save time, but not having to do research or having to check the web. So we do think that that's another place where AI will help our customers. And I think the hype cycle is a little crazy, but I think the purpose built AI tools are going to continue to do great things for customers.
Great. What would you say are some other trends that you see emerging in the industry?
Besides AI.
Which the
Yeah.
elephant in the room, or the behemoth? Yeah.
Well, the other two, we talked about one, which is value. I mean, that absolutely has
Mhm.
has taken off. Customers are expecting their vendors to be able to talk about that. The other one is another hype cycle on tool and vendor consolidation. And this often happens when we have downturns in the economy, as you know.
Sure.
But what's interesting is that tool proliferation, which is sort of the byproduct of really great software companies building lots of great stuff. It's interesting and fun, but it actually makes the job of the enterprise harder sometimes.
Mm.
So I see a whole cycle of rationalization happening, consolidation, customers requesting their more trusted partners to help them figure out if they can rationalize tools and products so that they can simplify the experience of their employees. I had one customer, for example, that has 90 monitoring tools across their state
Nice.
for applications. And so, how do you build an enterprise architecture around that? How do you
Yeah.
create true digital resilience when you have 90 different monitoring tools you're relying on? And they won't get down to one, but can they get down to sub 20? Absolutely. And when you spend time with customers and look at their architectures, and you look at the power that SaaS has brought, which is almost anybody can go out and start using tools and applications, and the complexity that brings to the enterprise, which is proliferation, you can see why they're starting to focus on that.
Yeah. Absolutely. I want to spend our remaining few minutes talking about you and your leadership, if that's all right. The first of these questions would just be around, I mean, you're clearly a purpose driven leader. You've talked about that several times already. What are some of the biggest leadership lessons you've learned beyond that in your own journey of leadership?
I really think that leadership is not management, and leadership is fundamentally based on a level of trust that you establish with your teams.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is I think it's when your teams believe that you're not just going to act in your own self-interest, that you are literally going to set a vision and a purpose and a plan and bring people on that so that they can be their best self, so they can have their best career, their best life. I think leaders fail when they show that they're absolutely selfish and just serving their own self-interest, which is, it's human nature, but that's not the job of a leader, I think. And I think to effectively do that, therefore, you have to lead with empathy. You have to have a high EQ. I think you've got to be able to build trust through transparency and your actions. And to me, there's two ways to lead. There's kind of leading that way, and there's kind of leading the other way. I think what's frustrating for me is you can actually have success and lead poorly. The business can be successful. You might make a bunch of money and get accolades and get promoted and have your picture in Forbes, but you leave a terrible wake behind you. And I've seen that in action. And when you spend time with people and get them to really talk about who are the people that have impacted their lives and made it better, who are the people that helped them grow and flourish, and what were the characteristics of that, it's the type of leadership I describe. And to me, that's the type of wake I'd rather leave. I'd rather leave that positive karma wake than the inverse.
Yeah, it's great. I applaud you for saying and for recognizing that leaders can be successful and with many different motivations. But I honestly believe that our true A players self-select into the kinds of organizations that you've described because they want to be in an environment where they can thrive and grow and work in an atmosphere where there's trust and this aligned self-interest that you're talking about. I have a CEO I'm working with who said recently, I want this company, and they're a hyper-growth tech company, I want this company to be a career-defining moment for everyone that works here. That's his goal. Now, he's going to make a lot of money. Absolutely. He's already got a lot of money. He's going to make more money. But his reason to be there is to provide a career-defining moment for people. And that's a company that will be successful.
I love that. I would say my sort of short little bio would read, I want this to be a place where people feel that they can be authentic, that they bring everything that they are to the job, and they feel safe and empowered to do so. And I think those types of purpose statements are important, and that you connect with people and give them that kind of environment, you'll do fine.
Yeah, exactly. My last question, Christian, the tagline for my consulting business is up and to the right, because that's the spot on the 2x2 matrix where we always want to be. Yeah. Was there a moment in your career when you knew that you were going to be successful, when you knew that you were moving up and to the right?
My very first job, which was selling newspapers during college. I kid you not. I was going to be a lawyer, and I had to pay for college myself, and some fraternity friends said, hey, why don't you try this job selling these newspapers at night? And the first night on the phone, I blew my numbers away. And I realized, wow, I think I've got something here. So that's when I first felt that up and to the right, and the power of using your own talents to drive your own outcomes and connecting with people to give them value. So that was an early moment for me.
I love that. I think that's the ultimate product market fit, right? When you have your talents and your role aligned. So terrific. Well, thank you so much, Christian, for joining us today and sharing your thoughts. And again, congratulations to you and the Splunk team, which I think you've described as Splunkers, on your upcoming acquisition by Cisco. Take good care, and best to you and your team.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks.